They laughed when she walked into that courtroom alone, clutching a folder of papers with shaking hands. The corporate lawyers smirked, the judge seemed annoyed, and everyone thought she was just another desperate widow about to lose everything. But they had no idea who was about to walk through those doors, or the shocking connection that would change everything. Before we dive into this incredible true story that shows how one act of kindness can echo through decades, hit that like button if you believe justice should prevail, and subscribe because you won't want to miss stories like this one. Trust me, what happens next will restore your faith in karma. Let me tell you about Sarah Chen, a woman I've never met but whose story has haunted me since I first heard it whispered in legal circles 3 years ago. This isn't just another David versus Goliath tale. This is proof that sometimes the universe keeps score in ways we never expect. Sarah was 45 when her world collapsed. For 20 years, she'd been married to David Chen, a safety inspector at Morrison Construction Company. They weren't wealthy, but they were happy. David was the kind of man who remembered everyone's birthday, who stopped to help strangers change flat tires, who coached Little League on weekends even though his own kids had outgrown it years ago. Sarah worked part-time at the local library while raising their two teenagers, Emma and Jake. Then came that October morning when everything changed. David was conducting a routine safety inspection on the Morrison construction site when a crane malfunctioned. The official report would later claim he wasn't wearing proper safety equipment, but Sarah knew better. David was obsessive about safety protocols. It's what made him so good at his job, and it's why Morrison had promoted him to lead inspector just 6 months earlier. The medical bills from David's final 3 weeks in the ICU were staggering. Sarah watched their savings evaporate as machines kept her husband alive just long enough for her to realize that the man she loved was already gone. When David finally passed, Sarah thought the workers' compensation claim would at least ensure her children could finish high school without financial worry. She was naive to think Morrison Construction would make it that easy. The denial letter arrived on a Tuesday. I can still picture Sarah, as she described it to reporters later, standing in her kitchen reading words that made no sense. Employee negligence. Violation of safety protocols. Claim denied. Attached was security footage showing David removing his hard hat moments before the accident. The timestamp read 2:47 p.m., exactly when the crane malfunctioned. Sarah knew something was wrong. David never removed his safety equipment on site. Never. But when she called Morrison's insurance department, they were polite but firm. The evidence was clear, they said. David had been negligent, and the company bore no responsibility for his death. That's when Sarah made the calls that would change her life. Attorney after attorney quoted the same retainer fee, $50,000 up front. She had exactly $3,000 in her checking account and a house with a mortgage that was already 2 months behind. The most expensive lawyer in town, Margaret Walsh, was brutally honest during their consultation. "Mrs. Chen," she said, "Morrison Construction has one of the most ruthless legal teams in the state. Without significant resources, you're fighting a war with a water gun." So Sarah did what desperate people do. She decided to represent herself. For 3 months, Sarah lived at the county law library. She checked out every book on workers' compensation law, employment litigation, and civil procedure. Her dining room table became a war room covered with highlighters, sticky notes, and legal pads filled with her careful handwriting. Emma and Jake watched their mother transform from a grieving widow into something harder, more determined. They brought her coffee at midnight and reminded her to eat, but they could see the toll it was taking. Sarah discovered things that kept her awake at night. Morrison Construction had been cited for safety violations 7 times in the past 2 years. 3 other employees had been injured on the same job site where David died. Each time, Morrison had claimed employee negligence and denied workers' compensation claims. Each time they'd won because the injured workers couldn't afford legal representation. But Sarah also found hope in those late-night research sessions. The timestamp on that security footage bothered her. She'd called David at 2:35 p.m. that day to remind him about Jake's parent-teacher conference. He'd answered on the first ring, and she could hear the construction noise in the background. He'd mentioned he was about to wrap up his final inspection. If the accident happened at 2:47 p.m., why would David have removed his hard hat during an active crane operation? It didn't make sense. The morning of the hearing, Sarah woke up at 4 a.m. with her stomach in knots. She'd pressed her best black dress and organized her evidence into manila folders with handwritten labels. As she walked into the courthouse, she felt like she was entering a foreign country where everyone spoke a language she was still learning. Morrison Construction's legal team was waiting. 5 lawyers in suits that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly mortgage payment. Their lead attorney was James Wellington, a man with silver hair and cold eyes who'd built his reputation, destroying people like Sarah. They'd set up a portable table with 3 laptops, a tablet, and a stack of legal briefs that stood 2 feet tall. Sarah had a cardboard file box and a legal pad. The whispers started immediately. Other lawyers in the gallery exchanged knowing looks. Court clerks shook their heads sympathetically. Sarah overheard one attorney tell another, "This is going to be a massacre." She wanted to run, but every time doubt crept in, she thought about David's face when he'd first held newborn Emma, or the way he'd taught Jake to throw a curveball in their backyard. She was fighting for more than money now. She was fighting for his memory. Judge Martinez entered, and Sarah could tell immediately that he was already frustrated. He clearly read the case file and knew what was coming. As he called the court to order, Sarah noticed him glance at her with what looked like pity. Wellington stood first, and for the next 40 minutes, he painted David Chen as a reckless employee who'd caused his own death through willful negligence. His presentation was flawless. Professional slides, expert witnesses, and that damning security footage played on a large screen for everyone to see. There was David, clear as day, removing his hard hat at 2:47 p.m. 12 seconds later, the crane malfunctioned, and a steel beam fell exactly where David had been standing. "Your Honor," Wellington concluded, "while we sympathize with Mrs. Chen's loss, Morrison Construction cannot be held liable for Mr. Chen's conscious decision to violate basic safety protocols. The evidence is unambiguous." When Judge Martinez called Sarah forward, her legs felt like water. She'd practiced her opening statement 100 times, but standing there with everyone staring at her, the words seemed to evaporate. She fumbled with her notes, dropped one of her folders, and had to pause to pick up the scattered papers. "Mrs. Chen," the judge said gently, "please proceed when you're ready." Sarah took a deep breath and did something she hadn't planned. Instead of launching into her prepared remarks about workers' compensation law, she talked about David. She told the court about the man who'd never missed a safety meeting, who'd once shut down an entire construction site because he'd noticed a small crack in a support beam that everyone else had missed. She talked about the husband who'd called her every day at 2:30 p.m. on his way to his final inspection, just to hear her voice. "Your Honor," she said, her voice growing stronger, "my husband didn't remove that hard hat." David Chen would never endanger himself or his co-workers. Something is wrong with that footage, and Morrison Construction knows it. Wellington objected before she could continue. "Your Honor, Mrs. Chen's emotional testimony, while understandable, doesn't change the factual evidence. The security footage clearly shows—" "I'm not finished," Sarah interrupted, and for a moment, the courtroom fell silent. Even Judge Martinez looked surprised. Sarah pulled out a manila folder with shaking hands. "I've analyzed that timestamp, Your Honor. According to Morrison's own shift logs, the crane operator ended his shift at 2:45 p.m. that day. But the footage shows the accident at 2:47 p.m. Who was operating the crane?" Wellington was on his feet immediately. "Objection, Your Honor. Mrs. Chen is not qualified to interpret technical documents, and she's making baseless accusations." "Furthermore," Sarah continued, her voice now steady despite her racing heart, "I've found 7 other incidents where Morrison Construction has used similar security footage to deny workers' compensation claims. In each case, the timestamp shows the employee violating safety protocols moments before an accident. That's not bad luck, Your Honor. That's a pattern." The courtroom was dead quiet now. Wellington's confident demeanor had cracked slightly, and Sarah could see him whispering urgently to his colleagues. Judge Martinez leaned forward with newfound interest. "Mrs. Chen, these are serious allegations. Do you have evidence to support—" The courtroom doors opened. Everyone turned as a man in an expensive but understated charcoal suit walked in. He moved with the quiet confidence of someone who belonged in places of power, and Sarah could feel the energy in the room shift immediately. Wellington's face went pale. Judge Martinez straightened in his chair. Even the court reporter looked up from her machine. The man approached the bench with perfect legal protocol, his footsteps the only sound in the silent courtroom. When he spoke, his voice carried an authority that made everyone lean forward. Your Honor, Alexander Reeves, representing Mrs. Chen. The gasps were audible. Alexander Reeves was a legend in legal circles, the kind of attorney who appeared on magazine covers and charged $1,000 an hour. He'd taken on Fortune 500 companies and won settlements that made headline news. What was he doing in a small-town workers' compensation hearing? Sarah stared at him in complete confusion. She'd never seen this man before in her life. She certainly hadn't hired him, couldn't have afforded him if she'd tried. But there he was, placing a leather briefcase on her rickety card table, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Your Honor, Reeves continued, I apologize for my late arrival. I'd like to enter several motions that are critical to this case. Wellington found his voice. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. Mr. Reeves cannot simply... Mr. Wellington, Judge Martinez interrupted, unless you're suggesting that Mrs. Chen doesn't have the right to legal representation, I suggest you sit down. What happened next was like watching a master class in litigation. Reeves had done something Sarah couldn't do with 3 months of preparation. He'd gotten access to Morrison Construction's internal documents, email chains between executives discussing problematic safety inspectors, memos about editing security footage to protect the company from liability, technical reports showing that the crane that killed David had been malfunctioning for weeks before the accident. Your Honor, Reeves said, his voice calm but lethal, Morrison Construction has been systematically altering security footage to deny workers' compensation claims. Mr. Chen didn't remove his hard hat. The timestamp on this video has been manipulated to shift blame from a mechanical failure to employee negligence. Wellington was objecting constantly now, but his protests sounded desperate. Reeves had documentation for everything. Digital forensics reports showing pixel-level analysis of the security footage, testimony from a former Morrison employee who'd been ordered to edit videos, financial records showing that Morrison had saved over $2 million in the past 3 years by denying legitimate workers' compensation claims. The most damning evidence came last. Reeves played audio from a recorded phone call between Morrison's CEO and their head of legal. Sarah listened in horror as they discussed David specifically, calling him too thorough and a liability to the company's bottom line. The CEO's voice was clear. Find a way to make this go away. Whatever it takes. Judge Martinez's face grew darker with each revelation. When Reeves finished his presentation, the courtroom felt like it was holding its breath. Mr. Wellington, the judge said, his voice tight with controlled anger, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I suggest you think very carefully before you answer. Did Morrison Construction alter security footage to deny Mrs. Chen's workers' compensation claim? Wellington's confident facade had completely crumbled. He whispered with his colleagues for several minutes before standing. Your Honor, without admitting any wrongdoing, Morrison Construction is prepared to discuss settlement. That's not what I asked you, Mr. Wellington. The silence stretched for what felt like hours. Finally, Wellington sat down without answering. Judge Martinez didn't need to deliberate. Mrs. Chen, I'm ruling in your favor on all counts. Furthermore, I'm awarding triple damages for intentional misconduct, and I'm referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for potential criminal charges. Morrison Construction's pattern of fraudulent behavior ends today. As the judge's gavel fell, Sarah felt her knees buckle. Emma and Jake, who'd been sitting in the back row, rushed forward to hug their mother. The same lawyers who'd been snickering 3 hours earlier were now studiously avoiding eye contact. But Sarah still had no idea who Alexander Reeves was or why he'd saved her family. After the courtroom cleared, Reeves approached Sarah with a gentle smile that transformed his entire demeanor. The intimidating legal warrior had disappeared, replaced by someone who looked almost nervous. Mrs. Chen, I wonder if I could speak with you privately? They walked to a quiet corner of the courthouse lobby, away from the reporters who were already gathering. Reeves pulled out an old business card, worn and faded from years of being carried in a wallet. Do you recognize this? Sarah took the card and felt her breath catch. It was Reeves' business card, but written on the back in David's careful handwriting were the words, "For Emma and Jake, whatever they need. Thank you for giving me back my daughter. A.R." "I don't understand," Sarah whispered. Reeves sat down heavily in one of the lobby chairs, suddenly looking older than his years. 15 years ago, I was driving through your neighborhood with my 8-year-old daughter, Lily. It was raining, and I was going too fast around a corner. I lost control and crashed into a tree. The car caught fire. Sarah's hand went to her throat. She remembered that accident. David had run out of their house when he'd heard the crash. "Your husband saved Lily's life," Reeves continued. "He pulled her out of the burning car while I was unconscious. When the paramedics arrived, he was performing CPR. She'd stopped breathing, but David brought her back." Tears were streaming down Sarah's face now. David had never told her about the CPR, had never mentioned how close the little girl had come to dying. "I tried to thank him properly afterward, but David wouldn't accept anything. No reward, no publicity, nothing. He just said he was glad Lily was okay, and that any father would have done the same thing. But I gave him my card anyway and told him to call if his family ever needed anything." Ever. Reeves wiped his own eyes, not caring that courthouse staff were staring. "Lily is 23 now. She's a pediatric nurse, inspired by the man who saved her life when she was 8. She's the one who saw your story in the legal newsletter and recognized David's name. She called me crying, asking why I wasn't helping the family of the man who gave her the chance to grow up." Sarah couldn't speak. She thought about all those nights David had come home from work, telling her about his day but never mentioning the life-changing moment when he'd pulled a little girl from a burning car. "I'm sorry I wasn't here from the beginning," Reeves said. "I should have been paying attention. I should have known when David passed away. But I'm here now, and Morrison Construction is going to pay for what they did to your family." The settlement, when it was finalized 6 weeks later, was more than Sarah had ever dreamed possible. Morrison Construction paid $12 million in damages, with additional funds set up for Emma and Jake's college educations. James Wellington was disbarred and later prosecuted for evidence tampering. The company's CEO resigned in disgrace, and Morrison Construction was eventually sold to a competitor with better safety practices. But the money wasn't what mattered to Sarah. What mattered was that David's reputation had been restored. What mattered was that other families wouldn't suffer the way hers had. What mattered was learning that the man she'd loved for 20 years had been even more extraordinary than she'd known. The twist that no one saw coming, not even me when I first started researching this story, was revealed at the settlement signing. As Sarah was reviewing the final paperwork, Alexander Reeves made an unexpected announcement. "Mrs. Chen, there's something else you should know. Lily didn't just become a pediatric nurse. She's engaged to be married next spring." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "She's marrying a young man named Marcus Chen, David's nephew. They met in college and fell in love before either of them realized the connection between their families." Sarah stared at him in disbelief. Marcus was her brother-in-law's son, a pre-med student she'd watched grow up. She'd known he was serious about a girl named Lily, but had never met her. "Your husband saved the life of his future niece-in-law," Reeves said softly. "David's act of kindness 15 years ago didn't just come back to help your family. It literally brought love into his extended family's life." At the wedding 8 months later, Sarah walked Lily down the aisle alongside Reeves. It was a role that should have belonged to Lily's father, but he'd insisted that Sarah take his place. "David gave me my daughter back," he said. "The least I can do is share this moment with the woman who raised the man my daughter fell in love with." As I finish telling you Sarah's story, I want you to understand why it stayed with me for 3 years. This isn't just about karma or justice or even the power of good legal representation. This is about the ripple effects of simple human decency. David Chen never expected a reward for pulling a child from a burning car. He certainly never imagined that his act of courage would someday save his own family from financial ruin or bring love into his nephew's life. But that's how kindness works. We throw stones of compassion into the world, never knowing where the ripples will reach or when they'll return to us as waves. David Chen threw one of those stones 15 years ago, and it came back just when his family needed it most. Morrison Construction thought they could bury the truth along with David Chen. They thought a grieving widow with no legal training would be an easy target. They were wrong, because sometimes the universe keeps score in ways that no one expects, and sometimes justice arrives through doors we never imagined would open. If this story moved you, please share it with someone who needs to be reminded that good deeds matter. Like this video if you believe kindness is never wasted, and subscribe for more incredible true stories of justice prevailing against impossible odds. In the comments below, tell me about a time when someone's kindness made a difference in your life. You never know who might need to hear your story today.